Hello and welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton and today, Meta. It's been in court this week in the US fighting a slew of allegations that it uses algorithms to addict teens and knowingly cause harm. It's also fighting a move by Australia and more than 17 other countries to ban underage users. But at the same time, the social network has begun a more subtle fight, and that's what my guests and I are focused on today. In Canada this week, Meta's policy head went on national TV to claim it loved news and was ready to do deals. Now that was a surprise for publishers who've had their content and links blocked on Meta for years since Canada passed a law to force it to pay for the news it uses. Meta's response was simple: we won't use news then, and then they blocked all the content. But now there's been a perplexing pivot. It wants news. It would love to bring news back, it said, but the offer comes with conditions and with teeth. So today, I'm joined by four people very close to this debate. Lisa Sigatek is the publisher of the Crow's Nest Pass Herald, an independent local paper that's leading a multi-billion-dollar class action against Meta and Google for defunding news. Benoit Chartier is CEO of a regional media group in Quebec and a leading voice for independent publishers. Brent Jolly is the president of the Canadian Association of Journalists, and Jason Kint is CEO of Digital Content Next, the US news industry and policy group representing major premium publishers and digital content companies worldwide. So the deal is this from Meta: we will pay publishers for news where it makes business sense. And that means AI. Meta's saying it will pay for content that assists it in its battle to win the race for AI supremacy. But Meta has a condition. It wants Canada's law, the Online News Act, known as C-18, removed. This is what it said exactly, quotes: "It doesn't make business sense for us to pay directly for news content posted to our platforms, and that's why we removed news in response to the Online News Act." But now Meta's an AI company, and Meta said this week it absolutely is an AI company, but that's where it makes business sense for us to pay for news content, but we're blocked from talking to publishers because of the act. She said, the policy chief said, if we could reach some resolution here, that would enable us to have those conversations around the kind of support that makes business sense for us. So that's the deal. Publishers have to help get rid of the Online News Act and remove their insurance policy, and in return, Meta will start paying them again. So today, I've got some questions. What should publishers do?
I'll start with you, Lisa. You saw this. You and I have spoken about this for years. We've known each other for some years now. What was your reaction?
You know, it's the same thing that I always react to. It's unbelievable what they'll try to push through at the sake of everything else, at the sake of every news outlet in this country. You know, there's 550 publications in Canada, and a third of those publications are small independent newspapers like myself. So when C-18 came in, I was given, as part of the Online News Act, about $28,000 in compensation for them using my news. And that was distributed across all the outlets in this country. It was a game changer because we're now being paid by industry for the use of our content. It's been a game changer for newspapers. So Meta decides they don't want to participate in it, but they kind of do. And in order to not pay us all what we should be compensated for, they're going about it in a really sneaky way. So they want to pay a couple of big outlets, and then they want to leave everybody else in the lurch. And they want to create these like one-off deals. So they've taken Post Media, which was one of our biggest newspapers in the country. They're leaving them out. They're leaving La Presse out. And they want to create these tiny little segments where they can create their own private deals and then screw the rest of everybody else, which is just typical of Meta. It's a multi-billion-dollar company, and it just goes, and how they made their money are off the backs of hardworking people like myself. Mm-hmm. And so it absolutely, sake for better words, pisses me off that they're going to go after young people, young business people, young groups in this country, and they're going to break us for the sake of themselves. And I'll tell you something, I'll meet up with Rachel Curran and Meta and the Canadian government any day. And I'm going to tell them that the rest of these independent newspapers in this country, we're not putting up with it. We're going to use our voices. We're going to fight them tooth and nail. And people like me are going to start standing up. I stood up to sue them for what they've done in the past. And I'll stand every day of the week to fight these people on what they're doing to independent news in this country. It's disgusting, and they should be embarrassed that they even offered to do something like that.
Thanks, Lisa. So let's give some context here. So the first thing is that when the Online News Act came into play, Google did do a deal. I think it was about 100 million Canadian dollars. That money was distributed basically by an independent committee that Google chose to distribute that content to publishers. And so Google did pay. There was a lot of debate about whether it was enough. I don't think anybody would ever say that it was enough for a company of their scale. But money did go, and that money was material, right? So Lisa, I'm just going to come back to you real quickly. What does that kind of money funding mean for your newsroom?
Oh, it's make or break. I mean, it allowed me to hire a second reporter. So now, I've used to deliver the paper myself, and we've gotten to such a slim margin of profit that I go out and deliver my own newspapers. I'm 53 years old. I've been in this industry for 26 years, and here I am delivering papers every week. It allowed me to hire a reporter so it could free up my time, where I'm not doing secondary reporting. It's made my community have better news coverage. It's been a game changer, and it's not handout money, it's industry paid money. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that they take, and they never compensate for the take. And now they've been forced to compensate. And they took from us for years. They decimated our industry over a period of time, just bit by bit by bit. And remember, and I think this is really important, Google and Meta came in years ago and said to publishers, we can make your business model better. We're here to help you. We're here to use your news, and we're all going to benefit from it. And what happened is we got systematically broken down till there's paper shutting down across this country on a massive scale. If past actions show future precedents, they're going to say all the right stuff. And then when push comes to shove, they're going to screw us over again, and we're going to end up in a worse place than we are now. So we have to catch this now. We know better. We know better.
Yeah, hence the question about let's get rid of the law. I'm going to come to you, Benoit, but Lisa and I met, just for everybody that doesn't know, we met at an event for local publishers on Prince Edward Island in Canada a few years ago. And it stuck in my mind, Jason, one of the publishers, there were lots and lots of small publishers in the room. One of the publishers got up, and it was an open mic, and he said, Ricky, I'm a third, fourth generation publisher in my family business. What did I do wrong? And it was literally just at the time of the antitrust trials, and my response was, you didn't do anything wrong. Something wrong was done to you. Okay. And I think that we as an industry sometimes just need to take a moment, and then through all the difficulty, just step back and go, we didn't do this.
Yeah.
This is something that caught us. Benoit, I'm going to come to you. You are a publisher, but you also represent a lot of publishers. You're also in a state that's been very, very tough, or taken some of the toughest actions in Canada on the platforms. What is your reaction to the Meta argument, and what are your thoughts more broadly about C18 and its future in this scenario?
Well, first, I'm on the side of Lisa for sure. I'm representing 150 title in Quebec, all small newspaper, and we fight so much since the last 6 or 7 years to have a law to protect us, and that law had be C18, news online law, and it's that law is it's so important because it make a line between us and Meta. And when we start to, if we want to negotiate with Meta, it's always a real deal with Meta. I'll give you that, you will give me that, and at the end, you finish always last with Meta. Because you're small and they're big, and you cannot win anything. The fact that we have a law voted in the Parliament of Canada and it's approved by everyone in the Parliament make us way more secure in front of Google, of Meta, of X, LinkedIn, or whatever, name it. So that with that law, we can be sure that we will be protected. And like Lisa said, it makes a lot of difference in the newsroom. So I receive around $200,000 a year from that law, and without that law, I would have never received that money. And if Meta could accept to be right with the Newsline law, sure, I would have probably receive another $200,000. So I will not will deal with Meta. It's impossible to will deal with those one in California, you know. So at the end of the day, way better to have a law to protect us. And in Quebec, more in Quebec, the fact that we have a French-speaking province, and our culture is all in French, and we need our newspaper to protect our language. And thanks to the Parliament of Canada to have given us that law to fight against the big giant in San Jose, California.
Thanks, Benoit. Let me just offer another insight from some conversations that I've been having recently, which is that it seems to be the countries that are protecting the culture that are taking the biggest actions against the tech companies. So I recently spoke to South Korea. People only speak Korean in South Korea, okay? Well, they do in North Korea as well, but in South Korea. And so to stop their culture being homogenized by American companies, they blocked Meta and Google from coming in and built their own search engines and their own social networks. And so that was to protect their culture. I recently interviewed the Competition Commission in South Africa. Google was training its AI on publisher content in South Africa using only 2 of the 12 national languages. Again, one of them was English. And so again, it was going to destroy their culture. And so they've been very aggressive. France are very aggressive. And so I think that this culture protection piece is finally starting to be noticed by governments around the world in this negotiation. It's not just about tech and money and shareholders. It's actually about maintaining the plurality of cultures. Brent, maybe I can come to you next, please. Tell me about your thoughts on, first of all, Meta's position, but the piece I'm really interested in is this debate about AI, or is this just about funding journalism?
Right. Well, first of all, I just wanted to, Benoit was speaking about the situation in Quebec, and I also wanted to give a quick shout out to a piece that was published in La Presse earlier this week, by Éric Pierre Champagne, who's the president of the Fédération Professionnelle des Journalistes du Québec, which is sort of the, Quebec equivalent of the CAJ in their jurisdiction. And he was very, very strong, and they've been very outspoken as well about the impact Meta has had on the Canadian news ecosystem. So people should take a look at that and read it. It's in French, but you can also use Google Translate if you're not a French speaker to take it in. I agree. I mean, for sure, this is not about helping or sustaining the news industry in any way, shape, or form. And I think, anybody who would believe that, well, I have a bridge to sell you as well, because that's just very transparently not the case. I mean, this is a situation where Meta is coming and saying, look, we want to supersede government legislation. You can be critical of the legislation, however you want. However, there was a lot of work that went into this. There has been a considerable amount of effort into implementing the legislation and the regulations that come with the legislation to get money out to publishers. So whether you agree with it or not from, 3 years ago, I think that ship sailed. You have to think about what is sustainable now, and having Meta come to you with sort of this Faustian bargain and sort of try and set the terms of a new arrangement to say, hey, we'll give you this. I think back to, maybe 10 years ago and 3 words, pivot to video, ? Is that where we're at again, where, news organizations are being, encouraged to redo or reappropriate how they deliver content to their audiences, not based on what their audiences want, but based on what Facebook or Meta is asking for in return for funds. So I don't know, I'm just having a bit of, amnesia here when I hear about, the arguments that Meta is making to say, yeah, we'll help you, but with conditions, of course.
Yeah.
Jason, you and I have leafed through the big tech playbook for some years. Yeah, there are recurring themes that pop up in every country, and every now and then you see a slightly different change, a slight policy change. What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, at first I'd like to say it's music to my ears how well the funding that's coming from Google is working. And you're right, it's not enough. It's not as much as it was in Australia, but it's significant. And that was the intention of the Online News Act. And so I want to kind of land that, our involvement, my personal involvement, both because we're a association that's exclusively focused on the future. So we're tech forward, trying to make sure that the future for news and entertainment companies is a better one and a better environment for them than what we've had. We've been very interested in making sure that the conversations aren't divided between the various countries and the various issues. And so I think it's worth reminding the audience that, I mean, when Australia first passed the bargaining code in Canada too, following up on that, it was done because there was a recognition of, that there was an imbalance in bargaining power, and that these two companies, Google and Facebook, were likely violating antitrust law, and we didn't have time, for the sake of the press and the sake of democracy, to wait on those cases to play out. And so fast forward 3 or 4 years later, we now have an adjudicated monopolist in Google, threefold in 3 different ways. And with Facebook, we've got, an appeal now going on with our Federal Trade Commission in the US. And so they've proven that cases, and they're in the process of doing it. And the Online News Act is what was intended to put some money into journalism and the press. And that seems to be working from a Google perspective. So why there'd be any discussion about throwing this out is crazy to me. I'd be building on it, making it stronger, and forcing Facebook to actually be doing what it should be doing, rather than being hostile to the news, which it started to do in Australia and it's now doing in Canada. The only other thing I guess I'd point out, that why now, Facebook's also in the process of significant financial risks because of cases for copyright violations and piracy, using pirated content to train its AI. It's got multiple cases going on right now, and the discovery is brutal for Facebook. And so they're going to have to pay for that content. They don't care about the press. They don't care about the news. They've never shown anything to back that up. And so they care about the data and the signal and how they can use it for their own profits.
I couldn't agree more. Just for people that are maybe not as across it as some of us are, what happened? I'm in Australia. So what happened in Australia was we passed the News Act. We had a potential prime minister and a head of our competition commission who were both absolutely dead set on passing a law, and you had legal and political will occurring at exactly the same moment. And it really was, it took that to start. Change always starts with one person taking that first hardest step. And we really saw that happen. And I've spent a lot of time with the minister. I'm very close to him now. A lot of time with the competition commissioner, and we're very close to him now. And we spent a lot of time talking about this. And we built a News Media Act, and about $200 million a year passed to publishers from Meta and Google for 5 years. Okay. But at the first window, Meta pulled out. Google's still there. Meta pulled out and just said, we're not playing ball anymore. The government, we got a new government now. The new government is now trying to change it from a news media bargaining code into a news media bargaining incentive, which basically says that if Meta pays publishers, it will take whatever it pays and use it as a tax deduction. If it doesn't pay, the government will tax them more highly and give the money from the taxation to publishers. That's currently being discussed in market. So we are a little bit further down the line than you, but there has to be a protection in place, to Jason's point. Otherwise, you are just fighting ants against elephants. Okay, and so you need the politics. Jason,
Ricky, can I just share one last thing? You can move off Australia if you want. It was reported at the time that was all going down, that Facebook's head of news said to publishers behind closed doors, if you don't work with us, you're going to be in hospice. And so I think that's a chilling message to remind us all of how they feel about publishers in the news. And I don't see any signal for this.
Indeed. So the deal that's on the table to you guys, back to the Canadians, the deal that's on the table for you guys is, look, we'll pay you for AI. So let's ask that question first. Are you guys happy to work with them to train their AI? let's ask that question first. How do you feel, Lisa?
Well, they're not willing to pay us for it. They're only willing to pay some, right? They don't want to pay everybody. They're only willing to pay some people and leave everybody else in the dirt. And that's what I think is critical about that, is it's not compensation across the board, big and small. And some bigs are even left out. And especially in the French Canadian area, they're really getting left out. I mean, La Presse is getting left out of the whole bargaining thing. It's really about compensating a few to look like they're doing a good job, and to be able to say to the Canadian government, well, we're doing a bit, so don't worry about it. We don't have to compensate everybody, which is the same old adage that they do every time. I mean, they're going to go across, they're going to do whatever they can to do the least amount of payment that they have to do to placate somebody so that we just keep quiet. And I think we got to a point prior to the Online News Act with Google, where we were like beaten dogs. We were willing to take any handout that they gave to publishers, and the big ones just took it. They just took whatever they were given, and they keep your mouth shut and just go along your merry way. And I think that's the problem, is they would love to get rid of that act, because then they can just pick and choose who they want to give money to. They can starve the dog again so that they learn to beg like they're supposed to, and then a whole bunch of us shut down, and then there's nobody to argue against. So it's just a dog. It's like a vicious circle, and they know how to play the game. They're playing it in every country. They just feel that I think they feel that the Canadians are we're soft and we're going to take it, not understanding that maybe we're not.
I even think it's also over and above that. I mean, I think it's a question of power, and they recognize that they are in a considerable position of power. And
100%.
whatever the public policy or economic landscape in Canada is, whether publishers want to hold out, or whether they agree to take, the crumbs that, fall to them. I think that Facebook or Meta is smart enough to know and recognize that that's the reality of the situation. So you're dealing with what is the ideal scenario, and how do we all, what is the collective position of the industry versus, are they able to peel off people based on the economic just disparity and need to keep operations afloat. But yeah, no, I think Canada is very much a test case. It was a test case post-Australia to see what happens when, we kind of throw a wrench in the gears to see what happens, because it went one way in Australia and now Canada. And then if it happened once, it was an anomaly. Once it happens 2-3 times, it becomes a trend. And then it's all downhill from there. And, governments around the world are going to pay attention that, hey, this is the one way to fight back. And so that was Meta. I mean, I don't know what else they would have done. I think they would have been stupid not to do it that way if they're making a decision.
Yeah, but the act is there. The act exists, and it's concrete. So they will have to broke that, and good luck to them if they want to broke it. We voted that law 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago. It's clear and simple. You give us money. You use our news. You give us money, and it's across the board, like Lisa said. It's the big newspaper in Toronto or the little newspaper in Newfoundland have the same amount or compensate as equal, and everybody is happy. So I cannot. How can Carney or our Prime Minister or Minister of Patrimoine Canada can say, well, I think we will open the act and we will let Meta start to deal with some. Good luck.
But they want to, right? If they can win this in Canada, they're going to win it everywhere. We're good. And that's the thing that we have to remember. We're not just, this isn't just about Canada. This is about the bigger picture of when we started our class action lawsuit against Google and Facebook, we were the first in the world to do it. Now, Ricky, how many countries are doing the same thing?
Oh, well, I'm advising at least 3 continents. So yeah, a lot.
Yeah. So what we do in Canada sets the benchmark. So they're going to come after the first one in every way, shape, or form they can. And if we cave to this, we've now said to them, go forward on weaker countries. It shows that we're weak if we cave. It shows the government that they're weak and that they're willing to cave into industries out of the US. It's just this whole thing again. It's this whole concept of we're the test piece, and they're going to push it as far as they can. So it's up to us to make sure that our government represents the Canadian people and not some high-tech group out of Silicon Valley.
Well, you have the Trump factor too. That's not easy to deal with, but for sure, Trump will put a lot of pressure on Mr. Carney, maybe, but hope that everything will stand.
So I just want to come back to the fact that I think that if you were to ask the average person in the street, then I think the response from them is the tech companies make too much money and the publishers should get more. I think that's an accepted general view. That's not just an industry view. It's just how people feel. Okay. And people generally don't like billionaires. Okay. And so I think that the common man isn't feeling any richer today, and those guys definitely are. And so I think that that's important to recognize. But I think what I want to say is that absolutely, we have to protect journalism. I think that's a given. All of us on this have devoted our career to exactly that. But really what you need to understand here is, what is the strategy? What is the underlying methodology being used to try and unstitch the thing that we love? And really, this is about divide and conquer. And it always has been in every market. I'll do a deal with this company. Everybody else feels FOMO. They feel they have to sign. No one knows what the value of the deal that was done behind closed doors was. You have to assume that every deal that gets done is a little bit less than the last one. And so you break people up. So what I'm seeing the threat for you in Canada is that if one of your big publishers says yes to this, or if one of your big broadcasters says yes to this, then Meta has a wrench, it has taken a brick out of the foundations of the law. Okay, and said, well, there is a value to this, and we've proven it, right? So is that your fear, and how do you defend against that? Maybe, Brett, that's one for you, because, if CBC says, yep, we'll do this deal, if the Toronto Star or Globe and Mail says, yep, this sounds great, we want to be involved in building the future of AI, what does that do to that act, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's something that I've heard, discussions about around, how does the Online News Act evolve, or is there further legislation that's needed to make sure that there are parameters around, the use of data and content for training large language models. I think that's very much a concern for publishers right now. I come back to this issue of solidarity, and maybe I'm just completely hopeless and naive about the idea, but I do think this is a moment where ultimately we, as the Canadian news industry, journalists, publishers, everybody who has an interest in supporting quality fact-check news, actually agrees that we need to work together on this. This is not about peeling off layers of an onion so that I can work, self-interest. That's exactly the trump card, no pun intended, that Meta is hoping for, that, they will be able to peel off one with a sweet enough deal, and then it's all downhill from there. And, how do we set that up? I don't know, but I think, this is one of those kind of existential tests that, we're going to look back on in a few years, maybe even as soon as 5 years, and say, that was the TSN turning point of when, the game changed, because you're valuable as a publisher to Meta until you're not.
Jason, what's the strategic play here? What's your advice?
Yeah, holding together for sure. There was kind of, I think, three things that Facebook in particular, but Google also tried to use to hold off the flow of these types of bills and laws. Tried to pit the countries against each other, which was mentioned earlier. And, we should know that, Facebook had a global plan for dealing with Australia. So they were not thinking about Australia. They were thinking about the rest of the world when they tried to stop it. In fact, they even seeded all the press to try to stop Australia in the United States for good reason. And so they were trying to create a lot of friction so they wouldn't move to Canada. And so don't let the nations split each other. And certainly the U.S. administration could have an outsized role there. And I think we need to fight against it. Second, they tried to say that small publishers were going to lose out. And so you've got two great representatives of those types of publishers saying that the Online News Act absolutely works. And so saying that as loudly and consistently as possible, that it works for journalists and small pubs is really, really important. And then the third was that the government would be involved in distributing the money. And I think that's something we always were very concerned about, was we wanted to bring the parties to the bargaining table to do deals with each other. So require Google and Facebook to actually pay for the content, but not have a tax or something where the government gets to decide who gets what. And you've mostly avoided that in Canada. In the United States, I think it's worth noting that in California, which is arguably one of our most influential governors, a Democratic governor, I should point out too, they actually backed off on distributing the money. So you want to, regardless of who's in charge in the government, you want to make sure that they don't get to decide who gets the money or not, because that also creates some risk to press freedom. And so, I just underline that you have a really smart law in Canada. It was very thoughtfully done, and it was inspired by Australia, who also had a very smart law. They're not perfect. You can build on it and fix it. You can think about AI, but do not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because Facebook, only cares about itself.
Exactly. Thanks to Pascal Saint-Onge, the Minister of the Patrimoine Canada, who built that law. What a great law.
Jason,
I was going to say, I have to agree with Jason and Benoit. The law is pretty good. Like the act itself is really, really good. It actually compensates every newspaper, big or small, across this country. And you're paid on reporter hours. So they're not just giving you money for the sake of giving you money. They're compensating you based on the amount of stories and the quality of stories that you're producing in your outlet based on your size. So the act is so fair. The compensation model is perfect. If you looked at what I'm getting versus what a big Toronto Sun is getting, it's probably per capita or per reporter exactly the same. So we're getting compensated equally. And the act is so good, but it's like everybody said, they're going to try to break it by breaking us. And if they break us, they will break the act. And what I have seen, honestly, and I think it's because of this act, is there was a real disconnect between the large newspapers and the independents. And even though the independents are a third of the newspapers in this country, if you put us all together, we're not small. We're a big group of people, primarily Alberta, Quebec, and Saskatchewan. We're a big group of people. We have a third of the voice. I never felt prior to this act that I had a voice. I really didn't. And what this act did is it pulled us all together, big and small, and we all helped create what we thought would be the best, helped create what we, or gave our input on what we thought would be the best policy. The government took that, and the minister at the time was fantastic, because she really, really had a grasp of what was going on. And they made a really good act, and it works. And they will systematically try to break that down, because if they break it if they break that act, and don't tell me that Google and Facebook aren't in collusion and corruption. I mean, we're going to court because we're saying that they colluded and corrupted to do something wrong. They work together. So it would not surprise me if one group saying to the other, hey, do you think you could kind of, break up this act so we don't have to pay as well? I mean, these groups stick together. Mm-hmm. And so we need to stick together. And if we don't, we've done a disservice to our industry, and then we deserve what we get, quite honestly.
Jason, this is a bit of jazz hands I see here, which is that you've got AI is now the big shiny thing, okay? And journalism is the thing that we protected a couple of years ago. Do you think these acts need to be rapidly updated to account for AI, or do you think you let the AI party play out? By the way, this is such a close call. It's a bit as close as the Winter Olympics, which I guess you all busily texting about the Americans and the Canadians playing ice hockey.
Yeah.
So, James, do you think that
good sport? Yeah, I mean, everything needs to be, continue to evolve to recognize the developments of AI, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be used as a vehicle by the tech companies to undermine the problems we're working to solve. Meta can claim it's an AI company, but that's complete BS. It's 97% advertising. micro-targeted advertising based on collecting data and targeting users,
Yep.
based on using primarily a couple different apps. And so that hasn't changed. And Google is a search business with targeted advertising against that business, right? And so it's 75% of its revenue. So so nothing's changed materially. In the U.S., I can't speak as directly to Canada on this, but in the U.S., the copyright law is playing out in the courts, and the biggest thing they're trying to do is suggest that it's all covered under fair use, and they can train based on journalism and news with under fair use, and that's just not going to be backed up by the court decisions. So far, they've tried to convince the public that things are going their way, but it's not, frankly. And so we've got some key cases that'll play out this year, and we feel pretty confident that it won't be protected by fair use. So that's going to require them to license the content anyway.
You also have Section 230 currently on trial with the Meta cases, where they're immune to any legal action as a platform for what they publish, but that's under great consideration as well. So if fair use and Section 230 fall, then both the tech companies are in an incredibly diminished negotiating position with publishers, I think. Okay, so I'm going to come to a rapid fire couple of questions as we round up. Okay, so Benoit. The question we're being asked is very simple. We've got tons of money for you if you help us with our AI, but to do it, we need to get rid of the Online News Act. Benoit, yes or no?
No.
Brent?
The principled answer is no. My answer is no.
Lisa?
My answer is just try. Bastards. No, absolutely not. It's ridiculous to even ask. They should be embarrassed to even ask, quite honestly.
Ricky, I don't have a deal because I represent 50 or so different companies, but I can tell you that the United States doesn't have the Online News Act, and Meta's not throwing around money for training purposes in any material way. So most of them would probably say no too if they had it. So any suggestion up there that this is what's keeping the AI licenses from happening is complete hogwash.
Jason, that's a fantastic point. Thank you for raising that. So I also work with a lot of these publishers. Meta has spoken to, I think, 3 or 4, I think, and said that we'll do something. You probably know the same people. Microsoft has turned up and said we'll do some deals, and they've done 1 or 2. There's a lot of talk about doing AI deals, but they don't want to do AI deals because it means that their profit margin on AI is diminished if they have to pay for it, and that's their scaling model for the next couple of years. The last thing they want to do is reduce the profit margin forever on the thing that they need to make trillions of dollars back on for all of their capital expenditure. Look, I admire your courage. I do. I thank you for your work, all of you. I think it would be fair to say that Jason and I are both here to help you in any way that we can, and anyone else in this space. Thank you. Well done. And let's hope that C18 holds. And why don't we catch up again soon to talk about where we go?
Ricky, can I say one thing? I just was thinking about. I think we also have to think about what a winning argument is for journalism. It can't just be continue on. Kick the can, hope for the best. I think what I learned, at least also during the Meta news block, is the public actually paid attention to this, outside of the, wonky sphere of, algorithmic, platform governance, AI, licensing deals, all of that stuff. The public actually noticed when news wasn't appearing on their feed, and they were wondering why was that happening. And we have to have a good argument to why that is happening, and I think that's part of the game. Because that's how we mobilize support for this, because public cares. And when, we learned during the wildfires in the Northwest Territories, about what was going on and people couldn't find out. We see Indigenous communities who rely on Facebook as a critical linchpin of their information architecture and systems. People in rural and remote communities who might not have, high-speed broadband access. Like, these are the areas where we really need to lean into and say, look, this is why this is happening. we're going to be, as news organizations, at your local hockey game, your local community bake sale, your city council. Meta is not. And I think that's the value proposition that we really have to put in the window to say, to rebalance these scales of power. Otherwise, yeah, I think we're going to be subject to repeating the situation over.
I think we'd all agree with you on that, Brent. And I do think that there is a narrative for us to improve on the reason that we need to exist. I frequently say to media CEOs that indignation isn't a business model. That doesn't work. You need something more than that. We're professional communicators with an audience that care about us, that believe in our brands. We should do a better job of talking about ourselves rather than just about everybody else. I'm sure you'd all agree. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. And seriously, let's get together again soon and see where this has led. Thank you all.
Thank you.